are you? Well, good afternoon. How's everybody doing?
Good. Good.
Good. My name's Ted Wyka, like I mentioned earlier. I'm going to go ahead and stand up just so that I can sort of see you guys, first of all. Secondly, as I was sort of sitting there, I was just sort of looking in the backdrop, the beautiful mountains and stuff, so I easily get distracted. So to prevent myself from doing that, I elected to go ahead and stand up. But I'm really, what I'm going to do is brief you on the Phase 2 investigation of the WIPP radiological event. Yeah, I'm really, really pleased to be here today with you guys, and that's why I did not want to do it by VTC. I wanted to make sure I got out here to talk to you, so it's a real pleasure to brief the Northern New Mexico Citizen Advisory Board. And this is sort of an important role. The rollout is just as important as the investigation, not only within the department, but within the respective communities too. So this is your meeting. So Mr. Chair, please feel free and other board members to interrupt with questions, as I go through these slides, so that you don't necessarily wait until the last one and then you sort of forget that important question you want to ask. So I don't mind doing that at all.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you again for inviting me. The Accident Investigation Board was on the ground for about 13, 14 months. We arrived on February 9th, 2014. That was a couple of days right after the salt truck fire. Now this board, our board, issued a total of 3 reports. The salt truck fire report for the event that happened on February 5th, 2014, as well as a Phase 1 report, the radiological event. As you recall, the radiological event happened 9 days later, February 14th, and then we just released Phase 2. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through the first 2 reports, the salt truck fire as well as the Phase 1. But if you have any questions about those as well, maybe at the end we can go, if you have those, I can address obviously questions on that. The final report was briefed to the Secretary of Energy mid-April, and we rolled it out in public meetings. We've had a total of 4 public meetings. 2 for the first 2 reports. For this last report, we had one in Carlsbad as well up at Los Alamos at Full Large. Now, we also had a very experienced board, very blessed to had the participants that we had participate on the board, as well as subject matter experts. To run a thing like this, we went through tons and tons of experts, as we needed them during the investigation, on radiological protection, on work controls, on integrated safety management, safety culture, on the chemistry area, the exothermic reactions, obviously, once we got into the forensics piece, but just a lot of participants. I sort of also, have to point out that, when you have an event like this, and I know as we've all been through this on both sides of the fence, so to speak, we received a lot of calls from the entire complex, both the federal as well as the contractor complex. How can we help out? Which was really neat to deal with, not only from the board perspective, but I know Joe Franco and JR back there, from a WIPP perspective, just a tremendous amount of, help, as well as up at Los Alamos. And I also have to point out that, to do an investigation like this, it was really the site leadership, Joe Franco and Kim Lebeck and Christine Gillis on the federal side, as well as on the contractor side, to allow us to get to the information that we needed to get to, which was really key. I sort of, whenever I put a cover like this, I try to pick out, what are those sort of pictures that's important to the board at the time. Obviously, the one on the right, that's the breech drum. The one on the left, sort of interesting about that picture was taken about 3 p.m. on February 14, 2014. And that's exactly the location, that's ground zero, where the event happened. You might ask, well, why did you take that picture? We were just that good. We started the investigation 7 hours in advance. No, not really, because we were the same team there investigating the salt truck fire. So we were looking at the safety systems associated with that. But that's sort of an interesting picture. Let me just sort of briefly just recap the Phase 1. The radiological release event was investigated in 2 phases. The Phase 1 focused on the release of radioactive material from the underground to the environment. The Phase 2 report, this report, focuses on the release from the breech drum. Now, the board determined in Phase 1 that the cumulative effect of inadequacies in the ventilation system design, the nuclear safety classification of the ventilation system, as well as operability, compounded by the degradation of key safety management programs and safety culture, resulted in the release of radioactive material to the environment. It also delayed and made ineffective the response to the release. Now, the Phase 1 report was issued a year ago, April 22nd, 2014. We thought long and hard about doing that. We thought, well, should we just finish an investigation or should we break this thing up? And we decided to go ahead and get the Phase 1 report out because the analysis, conclusions, and judgment of needs was so important for the recovery of the WIPP plant in the underground. And so the areas where we identified inadequate or ineffective systems are sort of listed in yellow there. Nuclear safety, emergency management, conduct of operations, maintenance, radiation protection, oversight at all levels, as well as even safety culture type issues. So again, those were important things for the Carlsbad and WIPP to work on over the last 12 months. And I have to admit that it's a lot of improvements in a lot of areas, in the radiological protection, work controls, and emergency management. Both a lot of new people there, both on the federal and contractor side, new equipment in place, and there's just a lot of improvement. It's really fascinating to see. Now, none of the issues addressed in this Phase 1 report are addressed in the Phase 2, so you really have to read both reports to get the entire story for the radiological release event. Let me go over this slide. This is sort of an important slide. So the purpose and scope of the board, it's determined quite simply just what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent it. And we looked at everything. We looked at the program, systems, processes, procedures, as well as all the forensics. Now, what it's not intended to do, doesn't intend to seek or fix blame. We're not looking for the individuals. We're not looking for a head on a stick. That doesn't help us at all. We get a lot more information by going into it with sort of an openness for people to talk and for us to go through the objective evidence to find those lessons learned. Now, it's a very disciplined process, resulting in a formal report, as well, like the other two reports. I directed this team, as I did with the other two teams, from refraining from doing any analysis prior to completing the data gathering phase. That's really important to do. With the high performers that we had on the team, it's very easy to want to go connect the dots right away. But it was very important to get all the objective evidence, to the interviews, the observations, going through the documentation and stuff, get that all on the table, which we did. All the statements are transcribed. We had court reporters at Los Alamos as well as Carlsbad. So any interview that was done, is transcribed in court reporter testimony. All that's going to be FOIA-able information. I think when I went back to D.C., I had about 23 boxes of just documents and transcripts and from the investigation, and obviously tons of electronics. If you look at the web page, not only the report but just tons of references to go along with the report. The other thing, we did a very extensive factual accuracy review, both at Los Alamos and WIPP, and both with the feds and the contractors. We did things a little bit differently. Rather than sort of blacking out all the good information, the analysis, the conclusions, the judgment of needs, typically you just provide the facts. We put everything on the table, and I wanted to do that, to put the cards on the table, face up, to get comments on the analysis, conclusions, and judgment of needs. The other key thing about the process is that every causal factor, every conclusion, every judgment of need is something that is agreed to by all 5 board members. And it's also backed up by multiple sources. So we went through a lot of discussions throughout the investigation. Let me go over the direct and root cause. And this is sort of an interesting slide to start with because as a board, this is the last thing that we ever do. This is after the months and months of the investigation, after pretty much the 400-page document, plus the tons and tons of references are sort of finalized. Then we sit down as a board, and I think we spent several days with a box of Snicker bars and having heated discussions on, was this preventable? What's the direct cause and what are the root causes? And the board did determine that the accident was preventable. The direct cause, as sort of listed up there, is an exothermic reaction of incompatible materials in the Llano waste drum 68660, which resulted in the overpressurization of the drum, the breach of the drum, and the release of a portion of the drum's contents into the WIPP underground. We have a couple of root causes here. Typically, there's only one, but in this case, we have a local plus a systemic root cause. The board identified the local root cause to be failure of lands to understand and effectively implement the Llano Hazardous Waste Facility Permit, as well as the Carlsbad Field Office Directed Controls, which is pretty much the direction from the National True Program. Specifically, Llano's use of organic wheat-based absorbent instead of the required inorganic absorbent, such as a kitty litter zeolite clay material, for the nitrate salts resulted in the generation, shipment, and emplacement of a non-compliant ignitable waste form. Now, for the systemic root cause, the board determined it had to be Los Alamos Field Office and the National True Program failure to ensure that Llano had adequately developed and implemented repackaging and treatment procedures that incorporated suitable hazard controls and included a rigorous review and approval process. Specifically, Los Alamos Field Office and National True Program did not ensure the adequate flow down of RCRA and other key upper tier requirements into the operating procedures at Llano. Some of these upper tier requirements that we're referring to are the Llano and the WIPP Hazardous Waste Facility Permit, key elements of that. Key elements of the WIPP WAP, which is the Waste Analysis Plan, and that's an attachment to the appendix to the permit, as well as the Waste Acceptance Criteria. And I'll go over some specific examples, but they include unclear oversight and program management roles and responsibilities and expectations, not maintaining the accuracy of the waste stream documentation, which is known as the acceptable knowledge, and then not managing absorption and neutralization as permit requirement treatment processes. This is sort of an interesting slide. This is a slide that lists the areas of contributing causes. They're not the contributing causes, just the areas. And as most of you know, contributing causes are those events or conditions that collectively, with other causes, increase the likelihood or severity of the event, but by themselves did not cause the event. They weren't the direct causes. Sort of look at these more like missed opportunities. The contributing causes were developed from the investigative facts and analysis, and they also led to our board conclusions and findings or judgment of needs. As you can tell from this list, some are specific to WIPP, others are specific to Los Alamos. They range from programmatic, systems, work controls, to oversight at all levels. And I'll go through these in a little bit more detail. And I'll also discuss the forensic basis for the board's direct cause. And this is sort of an important point. Even though the forensics may be the more interesting piece, and we obviously had a lot of people from the labs and from the technical assessment team, a lot of bright minds looking at what happened within this drum. That was the cool stuff. You know, the exothermic reaction, how did it happen? But it's really this list here. It's really the contributing causes that establish the conditions in the environment for the exothermic reaction to take place. So it's really less about the kitty litter, that's what I'm really trying to make the point, and more about the failures in these areas that are contributing causes. And when I briefed the secretary, he caught on immediately too. About 30 minutes into it, said this has very little to do about the kitty litter. And the same with the assistant secretary as well as the DOE leadership. And in fact, the assistant secretary, acting assistant secretary, has pretty much directed, you know, that this is mandatory reading for the entire EM program. Including briefings that I'm providing with all the DASs, the Deputy Assistant Secretaries and their leadership team, as well as the field offices. We're doing forums like this, VTCs or in person, and we're analyzing, you know, the breakdowns in the program's processes systems, because this is an opportunity for us all to look in the rearview mirror at ourselves, you know, based on what we found here, because as it happens, it can happen anywhere, you know. We're all prone to this, to look at our programs, whatever our programs are in terms of, you know, some of the things that we found here. And that's the key, and that's the value of this product, sort of as a lessons learned document, is something to be used to make a continuous improvement, you know, across the enterprise. Let me sort of work my way through the different contributing causes. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you sort of a feel for, what's in the report. And I'll start with the sort of area of the National Troop Program, and I'll also try to, make sure that, these aren't in any sort of order of importance. I just like to think I look at the program level and then work my way down, to the operating procedures. So it's sort of listed in that form. But in terms of the National Troop Program, the contributing cause is listed there on the slide. It's the failure of the Los Alamos Field Office and the National Troop Program to ensure that lands in the Central Characterization Program, or CCP, complied with the RECRA requirements in the WIPP and landfill hazardous waste facility permits, as well as the WIPP WAC, which is waste acceptance criteria. Very similar to the root cause that I talked about earlier. Just in case you're not totally familiar with the National Troop Program, on a couple of these slides I have these yellow boxes. I try to give you here sort of the tidbits that you need to know about what's important about the National Troop Program as well as CCP on the next slide. Some of the examples include the unapproved treatment, such as neutralization of liquids, absorption with an organic material, any addition of incompatible secondary waste items. Now, the board made several conclusions in this area. One was that the board concluded that the National Troop Program oversight activities associated with the characterization and certification of true waste were ineffective in identifying the programmatic weaknesses through the execution of the certification audits and surveillances at Los Alamos. Certification audit process failed to include key elements of the landfill hazardous waste activities, such as the specific glove box treatment and repackaging operations. What I'm really talking about is the National Troop Program sort of did not necessarily look at the activities happening across the generator site fence line and whether those activities would have an impact on the characterization and certification of the waste. Whether it was an active type role or whether it was making sure that the information come from the generator site reflected all the changes that could happen to the waste stream and whether it had an impact on the characterization and certification of the waste. Yes, Carlos.
Can you give us an idea about what's the background of your board? How many were on there? Who are they? Where are they from? What's their background?
Oh, thank you very much. I usually like to do that. Yeah, we had a very experienced board. We had people from the different site offices. We had from Idaho operations office, from the CBC, from headquarters. We had some nuclear safety specialists. But more importantly, when you look at the advisors that we used during the investigation, those were the experts in the complex. Wherever they were, we had access to them, whether on the federal side or the contractor side, and from the national labs, or the site or the different sites. So whoever we needed, we had access to the expertise. If you're looking for specific names and stuff, those are in the report. We have the list of the names. I think there's bios in there. If not, it's definitely in the 23 boxes of stuff that we have as objective evidence. But we did it. We had the expertise, and I was never asked. I was never given the answer no. And I asked a lot. To get whoever we needed, on the ground or with us or in the labs. To give you an example, like just looking at the heat flow modeling and airflow modeling, we had the University of Maryland, doing a lot of this analysis for us. Who's probably the premier, academic area in the country in doing this type of fire modeling. So whatever we needed, we pretty much got. Additionally, the board found in this area that there were missed opportunities in the certification audit process to identify inconsistencies between the CBFO directed controls or the direction from the National Troop Program, the LAN's directed procedure changes based on the CBFO direction, in other words, the procedure changes at LAN's, and the Wyka glove box procedure. Now, the Wyka is a facility where the drums are handled, and the glove box is the deck plate, the operating procedure. What I'm talking about is really connecting the dots between the program direction, high program direction, and the operating procedure, that the worker uses. Was that effectively connected, those dots? This issue is probably a little bit more remarkable given that the organic absorbent with nitrate salts is not a new issue. It's not a new concern. You know, it's a concern dating back at least to 2010. In fact, in 2012, the CVFO, or the National True Program, directed the use of inorganic absorbent with nitrate salts. And this was following a lot of extensive research done by New Mexico Tech, as well as by the local LANO office in Carlsbad on the problems of organic with nitrate salts. However, this direction, for various reasons, never really made its way, you know, to the subcontractor into the operating procedure. But also, none of the layers of oversight, including the National True Program audits and surveillances, failed to identify that the incorrect absorbent was first being used in a procedure, and it was actually being used in a process. As a partial explanation, the board concluded that the roles, responsibilities, go ahead.
Ted, on the auditing processes going back to 2010, 2012, what type of auditing is conducted? Is it annually, and is it done by a third-party auditing?
Good questions, and I'm also looking at all layers of oversight. You know, based on the subcontractor oversight that they do, the lands oversight through the contractor assurance systems. They have line management assessments, independent assessments, self-assessments from the federal office. You know, the work that they do, you know, as well as with the National True Program, which they do sort of an annual certification type review, and they do have independent third-party people involved in, you know, some of those activities as well. And so what I'm getting at is that with the history, you know, that, you know, probably there should have been a little bit more height and attention, you know, and making sure that this stuff was looked at, you know, because this goes back with the Waste Lock 770, which was an inorganic, or which was an organic material used as an absorbent with the same waste stream. And that's what sort of initiated a lot of the studies, saying that using organic with nitrates is, you know, sort of the wrong thing to do. So there were, you know, missed opportunities at, you know, throughout the system, as well as, and I'll talk about through headquarters as well. You know, so oversight, you know, several missed opportunities in the area of oversight. But as a partial explanation, at least, the board concluded that the roles and responsibilities and expectations as documented in the National True Program policies and procedures appeared to limit, and this is through the interviews, appeared to limit the ability of the National True Program and others to analyze and assess the generator site waste activities. In other words, was it appropriate to sort of go, you know, across that generator site boundary? And I'm not talking about, you know, a proactive type review. It might be just making sure that they're doing a review and they're getting you the information that you need to be able to, you know, answer that question as the repository, you know, whether it, you know, there's an impact on the characterization and certification. Now, the board looked at all that stuff. We looked at the CFR, we looked at the waste analysis plan, the permit, and we think it was more of a perception than a reality, that sort of self-limitation. Therefore, the board developed a judgment of need for headquarters to review and then clarify the National True Program policies and procedures with regard to fully understanding the impact of the waste generator site activities on the characterization and certification of waste. In other words, we want the experts, you know, like JR in the room and, you know, others to, you know, look at the policies and procedures, sort of see if there needs to be a change, you know, in terms of the expectations, and also, you know, across the complex, across the enterprise, because we had parts of the team, and I dispatched parts of the team to, you know, look at the True Program at Idaho as well as the Oak Ridge, you know, so this is a judgment of need that we need to, you know, look across the enterprise on. In this area, as well as some of the other areas, we have sort of what you would call extended condition type findings or judgment of needs. And that's rather than looking through a straw and trying to just solve the words of the identified finding or judgment of need, step back a little bit and look at it from a programmatic perspective. Let me go through the next area, Central Characterization Program. The board determined the contributing cause in this area As written up there is was a failure of CCP to develop an acceptable knowledge for the minnow 2 waste stream that adequately captured all available information regarding the waste generation and subsequent repackaging activities. Let me first describe what acceptable knowledge is. I think most of you probably already know, but just in case. It's really that compendium, that documentation of information, really describes everything you need to know about the waste stream. All the information on the site history, on the mission, on the operations, as well as the waste stream specific information, such as the generating processes, the waste matrix, the waste quantities, and the contaminants, both the radiological and chemical. So it pretty much tells you everything you need to know about that waste stream. And it's an important compendium of documents which you have for every waste stream. Now, we've determined that the board's conclusion was that the CCP, or the Central Characterization Program, did not ensure that this acceptable knowledge summary report, or this compendium, accurately represented the minnow 2 waste stream to prevent the shipment of corrosive, ignitable, or reactive waste. The acceptable knowledge summary report did not capture many of the changes made to the Wyka glove box procedure. And this glove box procedure is the primary and principal procedure at Los Alamos for handling these type of drums. Let me give you an example. Between May 2007 and March 2013, there were 37 revisions to the Wyka glove box procedure. And these weren't administrative changes. Some of them were, most of them were not. These are the changes that added an absorbent, changed the type of absorbent being used, changed the ratio based on the amount of free liquid and the amount of nitrate salts, adding a neutralizing agent, changing the neutralizing agent. So these changes weren't required by the procedure, but they weren't necessarily reviewed by the expertise that would, like some folks in JR shop, that would understand the impact on the characterization and certification of the waste, that would understand that this would impact the compatibility or something. So that was sort of a lost opportunity. So as a result, many of these changes were not reflected or updated in the AK summary report. Therefore, the AK, this important compendium information, was not as useful as we really thought it was in determining whether the changes would impact the characterization and certification of waste. I have to, the accuracy of the acceptable knowledge summary report is important for every waste stream, but it's probably particularly important for this waste stream, the minnow 2 waste stream, because of the limited ability of the supporting characterization methods, such as real-time radiography or visual examination, to pick out or to distinguish between organic or inorganic material. Taking a picture through the drum, you're not going to be able to tell whether it's organic or inorganic material. Or if you eyeball it, you're not really going to be able to tell whether it's organic or inorganic material. That's why for this case, and for all cases, keeping the acceptable knowledge summary report accurate and relevant is really critical, but especially for this stream. And it really wasn't, because of the inability to really assess those changes that were happening on a real-time basis with the glove box procedure. Yeah, Doug.
Each one of the labs sort of have certain tests that are made on each one of these barrels before they're made ready to go. Because like Los Alamos, I know it's 3 tests.
Yep.
They didn't find any problem in the roughly 14 to 3-week period between that particular barrel being shipped to WIPP.
Yep.
But do other labs do more elaborate testing before it's shipped? Or
I think they do. Yeah, I think they do about the same type of testing, and that's sort of laid out by the program. And they're good tests, and they do detect issues. This was a unique case where the type of reaction that we saw in this drum, in this particular waste stream, or at least this particular drum, was that type of exothermic reaction that happens at almost a discrete time after the cocktail is sort of introduced, or after it's made, so to speak. Usually that's about 60 days. In fact, most hay farmers that could tell you that an organic absorbent with especially a wet organic absorbent with nitrate salts and stuff like that, you would expect a reaction after a certain period of time. Even 60 days was always a sort of thing thrown out. So, it didn't necessarily pick up the things that would trigger us that something was going on here. Even though you do the headspace gas, you do NDA, you do, certain tests, as part of the certification characterization process. But you really look at the process itself and understanding what's in the drum, what's compatible with what, as you package these things. Okay, let me go to a couple of other areas of contributing causes. These are probably more specific to Los Alamos. One was a hazard identification and controls. In this area, we found that the failure of lands to develop and implement adequate processes for hazard identification and controls. The board concluded that the execution of the land's job hazard analysis was ineffective in identifying the hazard created by the addition of organic absorbent with nitrate salts. We looked at pretty much the entire JHA process, and we found issues with the analysis process, the procedures, the clarity in the procedures, probably more importantly, the skill mix that was involved in a process. When you look at stuff like this, you need to make sure you have your industrial hygienists or people that would understand compatibility and reactions with chemistry involved in the process. The board also concluded that lands did not adequately evaluate the impact of the WIPP waste acceptance criteria or effectively control the addition of secondary job waste into the true waste containers. Specifically, the Wicker glove box procedure contained no specific direction to dispose of secondary waste items such as gloves and neutralizer containers, even though these were routinely placed into daughter drums. What's going on in a Wicker procedure? You're taking maybe in this case, a 30-year-old drum, and you're producing a couple of daughter drums. So you have this one glove box, and you're taking this drum and you're putting it pretty much on its side, and you're decanting out the free liquid. And with that liquid, you check the pH, and you use neutralizing agent to probably bring it to about a 6 or 7 in terms of neutral pH. And then you use absorbent to absorb the free liquid, and then you also put some into the daughter drums based on the ratio of nitrate salts. But in this case, in this glove box, you also have other things in there. You may have gloves, which are some are lead liner, some are not. You have plastics and other things, empty containers, and it was a sort of a common practice to go ahead and put that stuff into the daughter drums. Problem is that the procedure was not clear on what you can put into it and what you couldn't, nor was there any technical evaluation of putting these secondary waste items into the daughter drums, even checking whether there was a compatibility issue, which was sort of the gist for discharge technique. The second area there, the lands procedures and safety programs. Board determined the contributing cause would be the failure of lands to implement effective processes for procedure development, review, and change control. A couple of conclusions that we had in this area was that lands failed to ensure that there was sufficient detail provided in a Wicker glove box procedure to ensure safe, consistent, and compliant repackaging of the waste. Package lacked details on neutralization, including a documented hazard analysis on the chemicals used or the change in the chemicals, as I mentioned earlier. Additionally, until revision 37, which was in about the March 2013 timeframe, the Wicker glove box, the glove box procedure did not specify any of the neutralization process. The procedure was silent on pH, on the specific neutralization. So the pH was measured, neutralization occurred outside the procedure, and then the liquid was absorbed. The board also concluded that the Wicker glove box procedure was not adequately developed, such that it did not contain detailed information for accurately documenting and recording the contents of the waste drums. What I'm talking about here is specifically the glove box procedure did not require the operators to document critical process steps, such as the initial pH, the absorbent added, the neutralizer used, or the adjusted pH. That's a real problem for the operators, and we even found that as a problem for the investigation team, because we were also looking with the technical assessment team, what were those areas or those drums that we probably needed to focus on, based on, that might be, sort of sensitive. And so, the documentation was not there really to tell us, which ones were the low pH ones, or the amount of free liquid in a lot of the cases. Carlos, I think you had your hand up.
Thanks, Ted. Records did not contain sufficient information to accurately describe the contents of the drum. Have the experts been able to recreate the event of that one drum?
Yes. Well, we had through, looking at the chemistry, looking at the potential reactions.
So if they were able to recreate the event, then they do have a sufficient information of what was in there?
Well, we had an idea of what was in this drum. We had an idea of 14 bags of nitrate salts. We knew this one had a pH of 0. This was one of the ones that had a recorded pH. In fact, out of the 21 drums that had free liquid in the parent drum, there were only 6 of them that had it documented. This was one of the 6, so we got a little lucky. And so we knew, about, the absorbent that was used, and so we did, we did some modeling to, based on what we knew. Okay, the board, as another conclusion, that the lands failed to provide sound technical basis for decisions regarding the packaging, procedures, and processes for the mineral to waste stream. That gets back to my original issue of, with the major changes that were done in both the absorbent, the type of absorbent, the ratio of absorbent that was changed several times, as well as the neutralizing agent. There was no really technical evaluation to back these things up. Let me go over this slide before getting into forensics. I want to sort of briefly discuss some of the contributing causes in the area of oversight in safety culture, specifically the failure of the land's contractor assurance system, the Los Alamos field office and headquarters to conduct adequate oversight were identified as contributing causes. Now back to my first message, you have to look at phase 1. We also looked at NWP and Carlsbad field office, oversight activities. So that's why, up here I'm just sort of focusing on what's in phase 2, which is the Los Alamos field office and the lands. Let me talk about the contractor assurance system. We pretty much looked at the entire system. We looked at the, you have the assessment part of it, the lessons learned, the feedback, the corrective action program, as well as the documentation to support that. And we found that there was inadequate depth and breadth of line management self-assessments, independent assessments, as well as management assessments. And also the CAS did not identify inadequacies in the procedure development or ensure rigor in the implementation of the change control process. For the Los Alamos field office, we've determined that the federal oversight activities were ineffective in determining and identifying weaknesses in the execution of waste packaging, characterization, and certification. Additionally, the operational oversight was limited to facility representatives with a lack of support from the appropriate subject matter experts in the area of waste management and CCP. And this is an important point, especially for across the department and for all of our field offices. First of all, we interviewed everybody, with the court reporters on the federal and contractor side. And I'm not sure whether you're aware, but the facility representatives are sort of the best of the best. They're real bright folks. They're out there, doing their job, identifying issues. They see things, they smell things, they hear things, and they, bring these things up to subject matter experts to help them out. They're not experts in all areas, so they're sort of like the tripwire. So we rely on them to sort of find things out and to bring them to the appropriate folks. Here we found that they really didn't have the expertise to go to, especially in some of the, specific areas such as waste packaging, acceptable knowledge, and some of the chemistry areas. And this is where, as a department, obviously with the funding, we're not going to be able to provide FTEs for, all the at the field offices for all the areas that they may have to deal with. But we need to make sure that that expertise is available wherever they are geographically, whether on the phone, at headquarters, at another site, so that there's that capability when they find an area that there's really the expertise not there at the site, they have a process to go to get the help they need. That's sort of what that bullet is sort of talking about. Let's see, from federal management and oversight, Board identified minimal external national troop program, operational performance oversight, especially in the overlap areas. And what I'm really talking about here is more the headquarters element, and specifically for the handoff areas between the waste generation, the certification, and disposal. You know, a lot of oversight on budget and financial oversight, but in terms of the operational performance oversight, and this is environmental management, EM office, as well as even independent office of oversight. We do have a lot of oversight. We have it in certain areas, you know, like there's stuff looking at packaging, or there might be something looking at transportation or maintenance or fire protection. But what I'm referring to is that sort of bumper-to-bumper operational performance oversight of the National Troop Program. You won't ever find a letter on that. You won't ever find an oversight activity on that. And we looked hard for that stuff. The other bullet, that fourth one, is dealing with safety culture and stop work, and that's important for, you know, us here, but, you know, also around the complex too. And first of all, there's a lot of great work going on in safety culture, you know, over the last several years, obviously with the board recommendation, with the skiwi efforts, with the self-assessments that the sites are doing. We're doing a good job, but those are one of those living programs. You know, you're always going to backtrack a little bit, you're going to get strong here, and you have to have a way to sort of monitor that, and to, you know, where you're sort of seeing some backtracking to make sure you reinforce those areas. But it was obvious to us, well, first of all, we did not do a safety culture review. That wasn't the part, that was the investigation. We were investigating the incident or the event. But a lot of this stuff came to us. So we identified through interviews that within pockets of the organizations that workers did not feel comfortable identifying issues that may adversely affect management direction, delay mission-related objectives, or otherwise affect cost of schedule. Again, this was sort of looking through a straw, looking at just this specific activity, but, you know, it's something that we'll have to look at across the board, not only at the lab, but, you know, at our, you know, the rest of our sites as well. Look at some of the precursors to this. Just to give you an example, some workers reported to the board through the interviews that the first level supervisors failed to address specific worker concerns regarding unexpected conditions or reactions during the waste repackaging. What I'm talking about here is during the glove box operation that I sort of described earlier, you know, that things looked, you know, that there were things that didn't make sense. Workers found, and I know this has been in the papers a little bit too, you know, that there was sort of a reaction, a visible reaction, a little bit of orange or yellow sort of smoke or mist, you know, and then they sort of stopped what they were doing, discussed that with their first level supervisor. As far as we can tell, we interviewed everybody. I think it was more at the subcontractor level, never made its way into the lands organization or to the DOE organization. But, you know, this was a real critical missed opportunity, you know, with the talent we have, you know, at the lab and throughout the complex, to step back and say, this doesn't make sense, what's going on here, what's this reaction all about? It wasn't anything about malice. It was more about just not understanding at the worker level, at that particular process, as well as the first level supervisor level, sort of the reactions that they were dealing with, the potential hazards, the chemicals, the possible reactions, you know, that may have resulted from that. That's sort of what that was all about. But before I get into the forensic, this is sort of a scorecard, and I know you can't see it, it's an eye chart. Not that it's all that important, but this just sort of lays out the number of conclusions, the judgment of needs, and the owners for the judgment of needs. And, you know, it's out that the math doesn't always add up, and that's right. So many judgment of needs have more than one owner, and that's why.
What's NA-LA?
That's the Los Alamos field office, the NNSA side. Then you have the EM side. So you have the LA side, then. Before I answer that, I better make sure I'm looking at it right.
Well, you have.
Yeah, I am. Okay, Los Alamos. Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure I was.
There was a hand over here. Question?
Yeah. My question is, I'm an old cheerleader, so I'm like. My question is, and it's referring to the previous slide, all of the different contributing causes and the lack of oversight, and really what is going to be done to ensure this doesn't happen again?
Perfect
because
question.
I know that they're still generating true waste. So
Absolutely.
Yes.
That really gets us to this slide too. because and we have sort of a similar slide like this for the other two reports that we produce. And collectively, all three of these reports is a big learning opportunity for us. You know, obviously, there's a lot of costs here, a lot of mission impact, but we were sort of blessed in that there were no fatalities and no real injuries. In fact, a salt truck fire, looking at that was, in my mind, and going there, was a lot worse in terms of potential of losing life. You know, we were very lucky that day. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And first of all, you're getting the same brief, and I know I'm giving you the raw stuff, but I think you need to hear it. These are the same briefs that the secretary received, as well as, you know, we briefed the lab director and most of his staff with an auditorium full of people, as well as on the federal side, and same thing in Carlsbad. And we're doing that across the EM enterprise, and we'll probably end up doing it, you know, working with our sister agency, NNSA, you know, likewise. And this is because a lot of these breakdowns here in the programs, processes, system processes are relevant to the TRUE program, not just at Llano, but, you know, across the enterprise, sort of like what you're referring to. And that's why we have a lot of extended condition type findings or judgment of needs, not just to look at the Llano story, but to look at it programmatically across the enterprise. Plus, even more importantly, it's really for us all to look at whatever we do in terms of our work, low-level waste, high-level waste, design and construction, across the enterprise, that we look at these same issues, because there's a lot of these are not unique to packaging drums. You know, the breakdowns are unique to any type of activities that we do as an organization, especially when you look at when you combine the three reports together and you look at the backlog of maintenance, the maintenance issues, the radiological control program issues, emergency management. You know, it's you know, for the entire enterprise to look at and to learn from, regardless of what we're doing, not just National TRUE program, but, you know, all of our programs across the enterprise. And that's why we're doing these briefings. In fact, I'm using the same slides with the site managers and their management team, you know, at each side, and they're doing the same thing at the contractor side. And there's going to be a field managers meeting, I think, in June, latter part of June, and all these briefings are supposed to be done prior to that. Then we're going to spend some time talking about what's our next step, sort of as an organization, you know, not just with the National TRUE program, but, you know, with the other pieces. And the other point I think you're bringing up too is with this slide, it would be inadequate if we just developed corrective actions for just the columns, because a lot of these columns are so interrelated, you know, that this is one that's going to have to be sort of worked in a coordinated fashion with all these organizations to make sure that, you know, the real essence of the judgments of needs are identified. And we purposely wrote these things non-prescriptive, because the last thing I wanted the teams to do, all 5 organizations and working with each other, is to go answer the mail, look at the judgment of need, and you know, put together an action that fixes that judgment of need. We're not the experts, and Carlos, I think you sort of brought that up too in the gist of your question. You know, you don't need to be an expert to investigate. You need to have experts available, but you need to have the processes and being the experts in the investigative process. But we want the real experts to not just look at the judgment of need, but look at the analysis in the document, look at the objective evidence behind that, look at the conclusions, and then come up with a corrective action plan, which may be a lot more than the specific judgment of need that, you know, we're writing in a non-prescriptive type manner, if that makes sense.
People are forced to, you know, watch these videos about people tripping over their file cabinets or, you know, dumping their desk on their foot or something like that. But then if anybody notices something that's of real concern, they're considered a troublemaker, causing problems, insubordinate, delaying a mission, or something like that, they feel like they have to look for whistleblower protection that isn't there, even for the most minor and, easily solved issue, that could be dealt with at a low level if it were just paid attention to. So how do we, get outside the, as you were saying, checking the boxes on a list to, paying attention to the real issues and looking into the things as they come up? I mean, just recently, apparently, the fire that burnt somebody at the accelerator had to do with the use of another household product that's routinely used in cleaning, and that caused a flash burn. So, I'm not sure what led to that issue, but it seems like, there are a lot of people who notice real safety things, try to report them, and get nothing but trouble for themselves. And what do
That's a great question and great sort of comment, too, in sort of the essence of what you do with an investigation like this and how you respond to it. And you're right, with safety culture, it's sort of like ISM. It could be sort of looked at, at a surface level without getting into the details of what's, what are the precursors and what are things sort of contributing to some of the behaviors we're trying to fix. And I think that what we're, probably the best way to do this is to look at some of the specific examples that we're calling out in the report, and not just the ski-wee training, because we've all gone through that, and we do our surveys, and even when you look at those are sort of identified problems too. In fact, we looked at those, and you're looking at the scores and looking at the survey results. There were indications there too. So it's taken these precursor measures, so to speak, and doing something with them and calling out that, we need to be able to, the workers and need to be able to raise our hand when things aren't going right and feel comfortable and actually being rewarded, applauded for doing that in cases where, the fact that, because it's hard to do that, to raise up your hand and say, I have a concern with this process, this procedure. That was sort of what we sort of saw. It wasn't a direct pressure. It was things are going great. We're meeting the 3706 campaign. We're months away from it. Who wants to be the one to sort of raise their hand and say, man, maybe we should evaluate the change in absorbent, change in the neutralizing agent. I think that it doesn't directly answer it. Probably the answer would take a long time, but we have to look at these more than just the flashcards and the program notes. We have to look at the real examples and make sure that the leadership across on the federal side and contractor side are aware of those examples and precursors. That tells you when your program may be degrading a little bit, and it's a living program. You continuously have to work at it. You may even have a strong program in this sector of the site, but this sector, this part, you may be backtracking a little bit. So even a site within a site or an office program within an office, you may have certain pieces that are degrading a little bit in terms of safety culture that you have to continuously be observant of and fix. Any other questions on this? Again, this is just some of the information. There's several other areas that we looked at that I'm not going to go over. They're in the report. I just want to give you sort of a feel for some of the the analysis we did and some of the conclusions and judgment or findings that we went over. But again, that's all documented. Now let me shift gears a little bit. I want to sort of go over the forensic piece. And the board established a solid technical and investigative basis for its direct cause. The event did initiate in drum 68660. I can say that with utmost confidence. This is based on forensics from extensive visual surveillance, chemical and radiological sampling, modeling, and source term calculations. Again, this was a true enterprise type effort, as well as outside the enterprise. I talked about the University of Maryland doing a lot of the modeling for us in terms of fire and heat and air. We also worked very closely with the technical assessment team. That was the sort of the team put together by the Undersecretary of lab expertise, doing somewhat of a quasi-independent review. But I tell you, we did work very closely in an independent manner. We challenged each other, and there were some areas more or less we agree, but there were some areas we saw things a little bit differently, which is okay. The Accident Investigation Board led and directed all the visual surveillance and all the sampling activities in the underground. Specifically, I was there for every time the team went to the waste face in the 11 months to get every sample and every picture that we needed to conduct this investigation. Visual surveillance was conducted in 2 phases. We used a dome camera, which is sort of like a football arena camera, and we provided the specifications for that. It had to have a high resolution, lighting capability, infrared capability, pan tilt, 360-degree turn. And so we had this above array camera, which was a really good camera, able to get pretty much into the deep into the stack areas. We also had a dipping camera, which was also we provided specifications, and we were able to get that into the smallest of holes, because the objective was to, as you can see on this stack, some of these stacks have 3 packages on them. And we wanted to get to all 4 sides, all 3 levels, to get as close as we needed to get to make sure to verify the integrity of the locking rings, or the condition of the locking rings, or the container seals in the packages themselves. And we targeted areas based on what we saw with the heat pattern from the dome camera, as well as doing a lot of analysis of all the drums within panels within room 7, looking at the isotopic ratios, looking at the amount of free liquid, looking at the initial pH. So we had identified areas, throughout the array that we absolutely needed to get to. Key takeaways on this is that the board conducted a systematic and comprehensive inspection of the array. In the reach, there's always a question about, it was a lot of money, about $3.2, $3.4 million, but it was absolutely worth it for us to complete the investigation. We assembled experts from across the complex to do the analysis in the room, as we brought up pictures from the sites, from the labs, from headquarters, from the technical assessment team. What was sort of neat about the team is we had those folks that came in with different hypotheses. There's no way there's only one drum, and I was one of those. Thought we had other things going on in an array, and that was important to have in the room. And we worked as a team. And just to give you a perspective, there's 64 stacks up there in this array. It took us about 10 to 20 hours of analysis for each stack, to get to. In fact, the analysis is documented. I said the report is 400 something pages. One of the references is actually 670 pages, and this is also free for everybody's reading too. And this is reference to the document. It pretty much referenced row by row, package by package, our visual analysis using the reach equipment. Also, let me finish with the board does not need or desire one additional picture or one additional sample to come up with its direct cause, which was important, especially we were able to turn over the underground, so that we're currently closing panel or room 7, panel 6 and room 7. So it was immediate. It was important to come up with that direct cause, make sure it was bulletproof, so that we can continue on with immediate actions. Yes, sir.
Can you go over the previous slide, the chart, and explain kind of what John, all the acronyms there, cons,
sorry about
Johns,
that.
and such.
I'll do that without turning it. Cons mean conclusions. Johns are judgment of needs or findings. It's sort of like a finding in most of the. And then you had the organizations off to the right there, and those are the owner of the Johns or the findings. Any specific ones in mind that you're having a problem with?
Yeah, so the first two, I just can't quite.
Oh, NWP?
I just can't quite understand. There's a row on, or a column on the left side, and then there's the acronyms there on the right as well. I just can't kind of piece them together too clearly. So would you be able to go over one of them just so that?
Yeah. Looking at, let me turn to it. Here we go. You have the subject. Those are the areas of contributing causes. So for example, the National Troop Program. And then under cons, we came up with 4 conclusions in that area. And with those 4 conclusions, we had 8 judgment of needs or findings. And looking at the owners, Carlsbad Field Office, CBFO, had 7 of those that they're responsible for, sort of as a National Troop Program manager. And then Los Alamos Field Office was responsible for 1 of the findings or judgment of needs, and Headquarters has 2 of them that they're responsible for. The other acronyms, NWP is the contractor that manages the WIPP site, and then lands, of course, you know what that is. Does that help? Yes. Okay. Okay, let me go to the next slide. This is an interesting picture. This sort of illustrates the physical arrangement of the reach beam used during the visual surveillance. As you can tell, there's not much clearance between that beam. We were sweating it a little bit when we were putting it up there. We thought we might have over-designed it. You only have about 3 inches up there to put that caddy in. You need that caddy to draw. That's where the cameras sort of ride along. But it tells you, it shows you sort of how it was designed, the fact that, it goes all the way 90 feet back there, and you could sort of look at the bulkhead, look at all the packages there, and then you also, the lower picture is a picture from 90 feet back, actually looking back at us. That's one of our headlights there. Now, every picture we were able to get some really good information on. This picture here, look at the MGO sacks, or this packages, on some of those containers. Again, the sacks are melted away, the MGO sacks, but the piles are there. It's almost like sandcastles on packages. They really kept their shape. The angle of repose, the shape of the MGO stacks. On an SWB, it has that box shape. On where there's a cone there, it sort of has a cone shape. What that did tell us was that it wasn't a detonation or pressure event, it was a thermal event. It was a temperature event. So that was a good piece of information that we got from that. Next slide is sort of the underground team. I put this slide up there because I want to reflect back that the workforce did a tremendous job, not only down at WIPP, but also at Los Alamos, but particularly in WIPP. This was the team where the 8 of us down there, but it's a much bigger team to make sure we could safely do this. The radiological protection people doing the RADCON work, ground control, making sure that it was safe for us to be down there. With the elastic environment down there, it's always changing. So there was a big team really making this happen. Sort of give you a perspective, where the stuff was brought in 2 semi-trucks, and it was actually taken underground to the scene. With 1 scissor lift, some golf carts, and by hand, and it was put together by hand, with the equipment there, with the PPE that you see there, 2 layers, 3 layers of gloves, utility gloves, respirators. So the team did a heck of a job, no injuries and no contamination to get that done. Let me speed up a little bit so that I don't interrupt the other speakers coming after me. Let me go over to just inspection results, summarize that into the 4 areas. The red area is, the red box is really the stuff closest to the face. That's where we're standing. And you have 2 90-degree turns going into panel or into room 7. And the furthest part from the waste face, that's that 90 feet that took us, that we had to really get to, is that yellow box there. And then the ground zero is in between, and you can sort of see the blue circles, which I'll sort of briefly go over, summarize those. Let's see, this is the waste face. This is that red box. It looked pretty clean there. No damage. Waste containers were intact. The MGO super sacks were intact, as well as emplacement materials. But we did get the camera down to every seam just to make sure there wasn't anything that we didn't see visually from looking at it from the front of the waste face. Bottom line, that red box area looked pretty clean. The backs and ribs, the ribs are sort of the sides of the drift, and then the back is sort of the ceiling, so to speak. We got the camera to, did a survey of every inch of that thing, and it looked pretty clean. The only place where we saw any sort of damage was on the south rib, and you have these MGO sacks. When they burnt or melted, or it's a polypropylene type material, they sort of open like flowers. And in part of that polypropylene sort of touched the side of the rib there and sort of scorched that area. And also within the MGO bags, you have cardboard reinforcing plate. So there's some combustible loading stuff that probably melted there with sort of the heat flux of that sort, which is sort of a combination of temperature as well as duration, and goes pretty quickly. Let's see, this is in the yellow box, which is furthest away from where we were standing on the waste array. The 3 yellow dots are sort of indicates the 3 pictures that you see there. As you can tell, those things almost look brand new. The packages almost look probably like the day they came in there. The interesting thing about those packages, they have a bunch of combustible loading stuff. You have the polyethylene reinforcing plate on top. You have the shrink wrap, as you can see around the drums. That's a polyethylene type material, and then you have slip sheets. So we learned a lot about the combustible loading of these things, which I'll sort of show you in the next picture. Bottom line, this area looked clean. Again, we got the camera wherever we needed to get it back there to confirm that. This is 17.5. This is sort of indicated by that yellow circle. This is probably the furthest place in the array where we saw any damage. What you're looking at there is a standard waste box on top of a standard large box too. Waste box may contain 4 drums or other stuff. Just really a little bit of damage. What you're looking at is a reinforcing plate, a fiberboard reinforcing plate, so you probably have some direct propagation from the MGO bag that's adjacent to that, or maybe some ember flow. Not much damage, but that's the furthest place in the array that we saw any damage. This is sort of an interesting picture too. This is 18.6. This is the closest place in the array where we saw damage. The interesting thing about this is that where we saw the damage is the stub that's facing towards us. Now the breech drum is in back of that, off to the left a little bit. Getting the camera on the other 3 sides of that, it looks perfectly clean. The shrink wrap was in place intact. It looked brand new on all 3 sides except for this side. So what you're seeing there is the mechanism is probably an ember flow, and this is what we saw throughout the array. As you're shifting ventilation, you have about 30,000 cubic feet per minute of ventilation whipping through there, going through 2 90-degree turns, non-laminar flow, a bunch of vortexes and stuff. But then when you shift ventilation, automatically shift because of a radiological event, you go to a filtration mode. So you're going from 30,000 to 3,000, and you have back surge sort of phenomena going on. And that's what happened here is you got some ember flowing backwards. That's where we also saw some contamination levels in front of the waste face or even upstream of that. Not high levels, but enough where you had that back surge based on the ventilation shift. Just a couple more slides. This is an interesting slide too. And when we did the first part of the analysis 6 months prior to getting the reach equipment, the furthest part we can get is probably about halfway down the array. And those were all minnow 2 drums, or the drums by themselves. But what we did find going all the way back is that all the drums looked the same. They all had that, you can sort of see in the 2 right-handed pictures, whether they came from Idaho or whether they came from Savannah River or Los Alamos, they all sort of look like that. And what you're seeing there is the melting of the combustible loading material, the reinforcing plate on top. That should go beyond drums. It stretches out there, as you saw in that first picture. You have that shrink wrap around it, as well as slip sheets and stuff. But we got the camera on all 4 sides of those things, and the locking rings are intact, the container seals are intact, and we also looked for any evidence of spray on the adjacent packages. We really didn't see anything. But it was the combustible loading that that really caused that sort of type of damage. The other thing, look at that lower drum on the left. We saw that throughout the array, and that's where you have the reinforcing plate. What happens? It sort of melted, puddled, solidified, and then cracked, and sort of gave that type of look at it. Saw that throughout the array. Let's see. This was ground zero. This was the breech drum. You can see that off to the left, 16.4. Underneath that, you have a 10-drum overpack. Then you have a standard waste box in 15.5 with 2 drum packages underneath that. And then you have standard waste boxes on 10-drum overpacks. You don't need the only message I'm trying to get across here is that this was the place of the highest temperature, but the only place where we really saw any damage were on the drums because of the combustible loading. The one that breached and the other drums, the other 6-pack with that, as well as the 2 under 15.5. You can sort of see that cone-shaped burn mark on that SWB, which indicates heat coming in from below. But getting the camera down there at all angles, again, the locking rings, the seal containers all look good, but it was a phenomenon of combustible loading material burning. The lower portion of that on the right sort of gives you an idea. That's on the backside of 15.5. That's sort of the small type of hole I mentioned that we had to get into. That's about a 6-inch hole, and we put that 2-inch camera into that, and that's about 50 feet down range. But we had those type of holes to get into all throughout the array to get the pictures that we needed. 2 more slides. This is the breech drum, and first thing, a little bit of information on the breech drum. It's about 67% filled. The top layer is pretty much empty, nothing, just air up there. Bottom layer, third, is where they put some of the secondary items, such as the gloves, the one glove, some of the plastics and other materials that I talked about in the glove box. That middle layer is where you had the nitrate salts, the absorbed material, and the neutralizing agent. So you can sort of see where that sort of lines up, that blue tint mark, and we did the heat modeling, both external and internally, to get the same type of pattern. And that's indicative of the exothermic reaction taking place around the absorbed liquids. So bottom line, the event initiated in 16.4. We ruled out all the other areas based on the forensic work. The greatest damage was around the areas of where we saw the most combustible loading material, no matter where the drum came from, because you had the combustible loading material around the drums. Demonstrated the importance of the ember transfer propagation, and this is something that we're going to have to go back and look at our fire hazard analysis, because we never designed for an event happen like that within the array and propagating through the array. And we'll have to look at that, and we'll have to look at whether we need to use fire retardant material, or whether we accept the risk, or whether we use less, or whether we package them, configure them differently. We also, in terms of the radiological and chemical, the chemical bottom line was consistent, not all that remarkable, just based on the limited samples we could get. Weren't able to get any good stuff like organic nitrates, which I was sort of hoping, but you could sort of see it was all there. In terms of radiological information, that told you that drum breached, because this one had a very, very unique isotopic footprint. That was the only drum in the array that had that type of footprint, coming from 3 defense weapons programs, and the 14 nitrate salt bags that were in the original parent drum was an absolute fingerprint for those 3 programs. But what I'll lead you with is, with the, definitely we know that 68660 was the drum, but, based on the radiological source term calculations and stuff, and this is where we're going to have to go back and look at our modeling a little bit. It's sort of in the higher range, gives a lot of credit for one drum releasing. It's still within the range, but we really have to look at the assumptions. The source term information changed twice on us when we were down there, so that's the input information. And then like the airborne release fraction and the disposition assumptions, we'll probably have to look at that. But what it does say, and this is a conclusion we have, is that you can't rule out very, very minor, and you can't add enough minors in there. Sympathetic releases, from other drums, but that was very secondary, and this was the initiator, this was the source of the event. Okay, that's a wrap. Any questions on the forensics? Or?
Ted, did you look at the daughter drum that's still in Los Alamos and look at the consistency of the waste in that particular drum?
Yeah, we looked at other drums, especially the empty ones. We did not. We looked at the information from the daughter drum, as well as our real-time radiography, and we're doing headspace gas analysis. They're all going through some sort of oxidation, and that did not have the trajectory that we saw, that we would have had in this, in terms of like the CO2, hydrogen, and N2O and stuff. But we looked at what was in there, and we did not go in and necessarily take a sample, nor did we need to for that one.
Other questions? Okay. Well, Ted, we appreciate you.
You bet.